Welcome to Delaware County Political News. This is part 2 of my interview with Manly Parks, in which he discusses some of his legal battles in the Delaware County Courthouse with the Republican Party. Manly, I understand that you were involved with a 2015 petition challenge involving the county council candidates and their statement of financial interests. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. That was another case like the couple I mentioned previously, where the Delaware County Democratic Party was a fundamental stakeholder in the litigation. These were our candidates, our endorsed candidates for county council in 2015, and I should mention that case was one that I tried with a colleague of mine from Duane Morris on behalf of the county. So as opposed to a case where I was not the lead lawyer, I was the lead lawyer in that particular matter. The case was heard by the Delaware County Court of Common Pleas, which is where such matters go and are heard, and at least initially before any appeal. And that was an interesting case because what happened there was that our county council candidates had completed nomination petitions, which is the collection of signatures from registered Democrats throughout the county that are necessary to qualify to get on the ballot for the primary. That process concludes with the filing of the nomination petitions with, in the case of a county candidate, with the County Bureau of Elections, which is in the courthouse annex and media. And we had a new executive director of the party who started on the very day that filing had to happen. And we had a volunteer for the county party who went over with that new executive director to get these nomination petitions filed. Now, under the election rules, you file some other paperwork along with the nomination petitions. You file, for example, you go pay a filing fee at the county controller's office.
If I can back
Sure.
you up, the Democratic Party, historically, this is a relatively new party here in Delaware County. Is that fair to say?
Well,
in contrast to the GOP?
Well, yeah, sure. I will say I don't know that it's new. It certainly has never really held critical mass at the ballot box on a county level in Delaware County. The Republican machine in Delaware County is nationally famous. There are books about it. There's a book from a few years ago called Ruling Suburbia about the Delaware County Republican machine.
Because its strength and its
strength, its effectiveness. It's been a one-party system effectively for a very, very long, like 150 years, going back to the Civil War, as I understand it, at least, in Delaware County, with the Republicans controlling things.
In contrast, tell me about the Democratic
Party.
So
the Democratic Party has been a party that has local spheres of influence in certain local municipalities. From time to time, the Democratic Party has had some success, whether it was with Bob Edgar years ago or Joe Sastak more recently,
sure.
in getting representation at the federal level in Congress under the Democratic banner. But that has just not translated into positions at the county level. There has never been a county council member from the Democratic Party for Delaware County. There's never, I don't know that there's ever been a row office, that is sheriff, register of wills, controller, treasurer. I don't believe tax collector. Those positions have never been filled by a Democrat, at least never been won an election by a Democrat, and no Democrat, to my knowledge, has ever won election to the Court of Common Pleas in Delaware County.
Well, the reason why I stopped is because you said that you had a new employee and you sent over a volunteer.
who do you have to rely upon to carry out the functions of the Democratic Party?
Well, we have to rely on our executive director, our chairman David Landau, the solicitor, that's me, other party volunteers to do that. But
how much do you get paid for your?
I don't get paid.
Okay.
And in fact, I don't think the executive director gets paid. We don't currently have one. We've restructured the party a little bit, but the volunteers obviously don't get paid. David Landau, as chairman, doesn't get paid. I, as solicitor, don't get paid. These are volunteer positions, and for most of us, and certainly for me, they aren't directly related to any business that I'm engaged in, and not a lot of antitrust work comes out of being a solicitor for the Delaware County Democratic Party. It's a totally different line of work from what I do in my day job.
Now, the volunteers, how much business do they get for being in the Delaware County
None, to
Party?
my knowledge. It's
what financial benefit do you get?
I don't know of any. I think that people, in fact, it's usually the other way around, because you're first on the list to go buy tickets for the fundraisers and that sort of thing. But I think
the other volunteers, what financial benefit does everyone get from being?
Like I said, to my knowledge, none. Now, maybe in certain areas, I wouldn't rule out that being a significant Democrat in a heavily Democratic municipality might be of some benefit, and obviously people who hold local elective office in municipalities may earn a salary for that. But ultimately, people are not getting fat and happy on money generated by being involved with the Democratic Party in Delaware County. I think people do it because they believe in the principles of the Democratic Party, and they want to see good government for their communities and for their county, and ultimately for their nation as well.
All right, I apologize for interrupting.
So what happened on that day was that our folks went over with these petitions to get them filed, and you also have to file a statement of financial interest with the petition, which is something a candidate has to submit that discloses, for example, what bank holds their mortgage, and so you know who they might be beholden to financially, or what their financial conflicts of interest are, if any, in seeking the county office. And you have to pay a filing fee. And there is a certain process by which you have to accomplish those things. But what became important for this piece of litigation was that these folks who hadn't engaged in this filing experience before went to the Bureau of Elections. They were told, oh, you have to go pay the filing fee. So they went around, they paid the filing fee, they brought the receipt back, and they then handed the director of the Bureau of Elections, a woman named Laureen Hagan, who happened to be at the filing counter at that moment. They handed them a copy of each candidate's petition. They handed a copy of the receipt showing that the filing fee had been paid, and they handed a copy, or they handed them the statement of financial interest. Now, what they did was they filed the original statement of financial interest, not a copy, with the nomination petitions as part of the filing package. And Ms. Hagan accepted the submissions and stamped them as received, and the folks left believing that they had successfully accomplished their mission. Ultimately, it was determined by the Bureau of Elections that there was a filing error because the original of the statement of financial interest should not have been filed with the county, only a copy of it. The original is supposed to be sent elsewhere for filing.
So why wasn't it rejected?
That's an interesting question, and that ultimately speaks to a broader concern that I have about the way that things sometimes work in the Delaware County Governmental Center, which is to say that, in my view, people who work in the Governmental Center, they may be there by virtue of the fact that people who have political control over the county have some say or total say in the hiring of people for those jobs. However, they serve the entire county, and this county is a majority Democratic registration county now.
Before you go on, the people who work in the courthouse, are they civil service, or are they patronage appointed by some a party boss of some sort? How does someone who works for a Bureau of Elections get their job?
I will not speculate about whether these are patronage positions. I think that technically they're supposed to be civil service positions. These are civil servants, they're county employees, they're supposed to serve the public. Whether there is a political component to how someone gets named to be the director of a department in the county government, I can't say with moral certainty. However, I would be stunned if there weren't a political component, because this is the real world and that's going to be a factor. And also I had an interesting experience when I was township commissioner in Nether Providence Township. I had somebody call me one evening and say, "You're the township commissioner for the 3rd Ward in Nether Providence, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." I don't remember the job, but it was a job in the courthouse. I remember that. And a full-time position is opened up, and but I've been told I need my local committeeman's signature on the application. And I said, "Well, a moment ago you asked if I was your commissioner, and now you just used the word committeeman." And he said, "Well, I meant committeeman." And I said, "Okay, so are you looking for your Republican committee person for this ward in Nether Providence to sign this application to the county courthouse job that you referenced?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I cannot help you with that because I'm not a Republican and I'm not a committee person. I am a commissioner, and that's different." And he said, "Okay, I understand. I'm sorry to have bothered you." And I said, "I also don't know who the Republican committeeman for the 3rd Ward in Nether Providence at the moment is, so I couldn't tell you who to contact." And he said, "No, I'm sure I'll figure it out." And that was the end of the conversation. But I find it interesting that through just happenstance or accident, it appears that there, at least in that instance, I can't say if it's for every job in the courthouse, a person who was applying for that job was under the impression, apparently, that they needed the local Republican committee person's signature on the application for the job. Take that for what you will.
So what happened next?
So after the original of the statements of financial interest got filed with the nomination petitions in that instance, a determination was made that the filing was not proper and that these candidates were going to be removed from the ballot. And we challenged that, and we argued that there was no deficiency because the fact that an original was filed rather than a copy is a de minimis and insignificant error, if you want to even call it that. And the point of the rules is to make sure that the statement of financial interests are filed and publicly available, and they were. It was just that it was an original, not a copy. So we ultimately ended up in court in a battle over whether the name should be stricken from the ballot or not.
Did it have to go to the prothonotary rather than the Bureau of Elections?
Yeah, that is essentially where the original should have been filed.
However, it's the same courthouse.
Same courthouse down the hall, and importantly, from the perspective of public disclosure, the Bureau of Elections had the statement of financial interest,
Which is where it would go from the prothonotary.
Well,
They would take it to the Bureau of
file it
Elections.
both places. You would file the original with the prothonotary, and you take a photocopy of what you file with the prothonotary and walk it down and attach it to your package of materials that you're filing with the Bureau of Elections. So they get a copy of it. They just don't get the original. So it essentially was, to me, an insignificant technical defect that didn't really harm anyone because it was on file with the government, and there wasn't like it wasn't ever filed and we're trying to file it later or something like that. It was filed and it was in the hands of the county government. The original shouldn't have been filed with the Bureau of Elections of the county. It should have been filed with the prothonotary of the county, and that became the issue. So we had this matter tried. We tried the case. It became a trial, And ultimately, the court unfortunately ruled that the rules are clear and that they didn't accept the technical defect argument. One of the points that I think came out loud and clear in the trial, and people can take away from this if they'd like, they're fingers to point at the Democratic Party if you want and say, well, the rules are the rules and you should figure them out and do it the right way. And I hear that, I suppose, at some level, but here's what bothers me. These people in these offices are public servants. They are to serve the public. They're not there to serve one political party or another. If they want to do that, go get a job as treasurer of the Republican Party of the county or Democratic, some Democratic Party position. But when you are doing the job of working in the Bureau of Elections and accepting filings from people, whether they're official Democratic Party endorsed candidates or a person off the street who's running as an independent, if you go to the DMV and they acted that way and said, well, you just take your best guess at what you need to give me to get your license, and I'll accept it, and later I'll tell you whether you get your license or not, as opposed to saying, oh, it looks like you forgot this form, or make sure you fill out, don't forget to sign, oh, it looks like you didn't check this box, do you mean to?
That person would get fired.
It would be outrageous. And it's no less outrageous when that happens in the Bureau of Elections at the county as opposed to the DMV or some other. I mean, these offices exist to help people accomplish what they want to accomplish through government, whether it's file for a new driver's license or a name change or something, or file to be a candidate. And
Certainly.
No one's asking. The position of the county official position was, well, that's giving legal advice. And I say, that's ridiculous. It's not legal advice to say, oh, this original that you're giving me, that actually should go down the hall. Do you have a photocopy to leave with me? That's all that had to happen to prevent this whole thing. Now, people might say, well, what's the big deal? Who cares? Well, here's the big deal. The party had to then run, which, look, the Republicans know this. This isn't a secret to anybody. The party then had to run an extremely extensive write-in campaign to simply get its endorsed and preferred candidates onto the ballot in the primary. That took away a lot of momentum and resources that could have been used for the general election contest against the Republicans for those positions.
Public opinion hit too.
In the meantime, there's a lot of Democrats are all confused and can't get their act together out in the public space and conversation. And frankly, I don't think that's true at all. I think what we had was another symptom of what happens with one-party rule, and when you have people who are county officials who are acting with the motives of the party in mind rather than serving the public as their first motive.
You said resources. Do you have any knowledge as to the cost of what that took to do the write-in campaign?
I do. It was on the order, well, I would say this, it was 6 figures, as I recall. And of course, then there's the time value of a bunch of people having to get out there and get the message out and make sure that you get the names on the ballot. And it was, not an insignificant setback for those candidates. And the shame of it is, there were some great candidates, and they had to spend their energies at a time when they should be ramping up their messaging to the county about what different vision they have for Delaware County than the Republicans, and they're busy trying to make sure they get on the ballot so that their names are there for people to choose in the fall, which we did. We had a successful write-in campaign. In the end, we got those names on the ballot, but the issue was resources and attention and time and momentum were all lost to that process.
Got it. More recently, were you also involved with litigation in 2016 regarding protecting 1,100 registrations before the presidential election?
I was. That was a case where I worked in conjunction with other attorneys who agreed to volunteer on what I think is a really important case and a really important situation. What happened there was there were some third-party 501c3 type organizations, not-for-profit organizations that help help do voter registration drives. And one of those organizations did a voter registration drive throughout Delaware County, and then submitted the registrations they collected to the Department of State in Harrisburg. And those were then forwarded by the Department of State to Delaware County, to the Bureau of Voter Registration, or the Voter Registration Office, I think it's called. And the county then determined that those registrations shouldn't be counted because they arrived at the county after the deadline. Now, mind you, they had been mailed before the deadline to Harrisburg and were received, I think most or all of which were received in Harrisburg before the deadline.
Is there law that governs this?
There is. Now, whether there was there is not a specific statute that says that the voter registrations that are received by the state in Harrisburg should be counted if they then end up being received by the county after the deadline. There's not a specific statute, but it's very clear that if these voter registrations are mailed in time, then they should be counted. And there also is a principle under Pennsylvania law, a very long-standing principle, that people should be given the opportunity, essentially, like ties go to the runner in baseball, close questions about the ability to cast your ballot and exercise your right to vote ought to go in favor of the voter. We're not in the business, according to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania for a very long time, we shouldn't be in the business of, when it's a close call, deciding it against someone's right to vote.
So what did Delaware County do?
So Delaware County decided, said, we're not going to count these registrations of these over 1,000 registered voters.
Well, didn't they do a provisional ballot?
Well, they didn't do that willingly. We had to take them to court and litigate the issue, and because we had some pretty strong arguments that even though that specific scenario wasn't detailed in the statute language was pretty clear that people were allowed to send the registrations to Harrisburg. That's the voter registration office for the entire state, effectively. And that if you do that in time, they should count. Of course, the county had its arguments, which I think were poor, but but what they did ultimately, because I think they sensed the weakness of their arguments, they said, well, we'll let these folks vote provisionally, which is meaning they'll cast a ballot. It won't count unless the race is close enough to have to open it and figure out if it counts. And we can basically push off the legal decision about whether to count these people's votes on the grounds that they were or were not appropriately registered till after the election and decide if it matters. It's kicking the can down the road. That's what they offered, and not surprisingly, this was happening a few weeks before the election, and I think courts are very reluctant to assert themselves and create dramatic political decisions in the moments before an election. I generally believe that's probably not a bad thing, because you want the political process to be free from the appearance that courts are somehow pulling the puppet strings of the political process. But I think what they did was they kicked the can down the road. They took a pass on it, and so those folks got to vote provisionally, and ultimately there weren't any elections where the outcome was close enough to have to pursue the matter further. So in theory, it could happen again. It's an open question. If the same set of facts were to happen at the next voter registration deadline,
it's not resolved.
It's not, we're going to perhaps, if the county doesn't see things differently or start to see things differently, they could take the same position again. And I think it's absurd. The county politically pointed the finger at the voter registration group, which, by the way, is totally unaffiliated with the Delaware County Democratic Party. Had nothing to do with what they were doing, because some of the registrations they submitted, a tiny percentage, turned out to not be good, valid registrations. But the folks who were in question with these 1,100 registrations, there was no suggestion, there was no hint, there was no scent of any kind that these were invalid registrations. These, by all accounts, were valid registrations for real people in Delaware County who were then made marginal by what to me is a pretty clearly politically motivated decision by the Bureau of Elections.
And so why did they not want to count them?
Well, these were from parts of the county that were, let me say
Democratic.
this, I can't venture to speculate why someone is motivated to do something. That's asking me to read their mind. However, in my view, it's not at all an accident that the organization in question was well known to be seeking to enhance Democratic turnout by registering voters likely to vote Democrat,
Okay.
and I don't think that was lost on the people who made the decision not to count the registrations.
All right.
Please tune in for part 3 of my interview with Manly Parks, in which he discusses his role as an election protection attorney.